In 1988, FBI agent Nora Cassidy vanished without a trace, leaving behind unanswered questions and shattered lives. For nearly 3 decades, her disappearance remained a chilling mystery until a disturbing recording emerged from a car buried in a scrapyard, revealing terrifying clues from beyond the grave. What dark secrets lie hidden beneath layers of betrayal, corruption, and silence? Follow this haunting investigation as agents uncover shocking revelations. Follow this haunting investigations as agents uncover shocking revelations, risking everything to find the truth buried in the past. Nora Cassidy was the kind of woman whose quiet strength spoke louder than any words she ever uttered. Her presence in the Boise office of the FBI had always been comforting to her colleagues, even when chaos consumed them. Nora's calm demeanor, combined with a deeply intuitive sense for understanding human nature, had given her a reputation as the agent who solved the unsolvable. Yet beneath the composed exterior and the confident blue eyes that scanned meticulously through case files, Nora carried a silent grief. Her husband Jason had died tragically young, and that loss was an invisible weight she never quite learned how to put down. She didn't wear her pain openly. Instead, she had found an unusual yet comforting way to cope, creating mixtapes. Every case she tackled was accompanied by a carefully curated playlist, a mixture of soothing folk, classic rock, and gentle piano solos. Each tape was labeled neatly, with dates or cryptic titles only she understood. To others, it seemed just an eccentric habit, but to Nora, it was a lifeline. A way of injecting order and control into a life that often felt utterly unpredictable. On a crisp autumn day in October of 1988, sunlight spilled softly over her desk through the window blinds, painting shadows that seemed to dance gently across her carefully organized reports. Nora sat quietly, absorbed in thought, her slender fingers twirling a pen absent-mindedly as her eyes moved carefully over a stack of photographs. Each face staring up at her was youthful, innocent, and hauntingly absent. 6 teenagers vanished without a trace in the Boise area over the past year. The local police had exhausted all leads, and the FBI had stepped in with Nora leading the investigation. The photos, taped meticulously on the wall beside her, reminded Nora every moment that behind every disappearance, families waited desperately for answers. She was lost in deep concentration when a soft knock on her open office door broke her trance. Standing there, tall and imposing yet gentle-eyed, was Thomas Greer, her boss and mentor. "You still here?" Thomas asked, stepping into the room with the ease of someone who'd visited countless times. "I could ask you the same," Nora replied with a slight smile, stretching her arms and leaning back. Thomas had a fatherly quality, a man whose tough exterior masked genuine care. He had recruited Nora himself, had stood by her at Jason's funeral, and since then had become an anchor in her turbulent professional life. "I figured you could use a break." He handed her a cup of coffee, black, just how she liked it. "You've been obsessing over this case. You're allowed to breathe occasionally, you know." She accepted the cup gratefully. "Maybe later. Right now, these kids need my obsession." Thomas watched her thoughtfully, noticing the faint shadows under her eyes, evidence of sleepless nights spent wrestling with unanswered questions. "You're right, Nora, but don't let it consume you. Remember, you're no good to them burned out." She nodded silently, sipping her coffee. Thomas lingered a moment longer, gave her shoulder a reassuring squeeze, then quietly retreated. Nora's gaze returned to the photographs, each young face pulling her deeper into the mystery. Hours passed swiftly. The office emptied around her until only a few desk lamps illuminated the silent halls. Nora finally rose, stretching, her back aching slightly from hours bent over files. She gathered her papers, neatly stacking them into folders, when her phone suddenly pierced the stillness, its ringing strangely jarring in the empty office. "Nora." "Cassidy," she answered instinctively. On the other end was a trembling voice, hushed but urgent. "Agent Cassidy, please, I have information about the missing kids. You need to come quickly. Alone." Her heartbeat quickened. "Who is this?" The voice hesitated, breath shaky. "Meet me at the old industrial park on the outskirts warehouse. 3 midnight. Don't bring anyone or they'll kill me." Wait. The line clicked dead, leaving only a cold silence that sent chills rippling down her spine. Her intuition screamed caution, but her heart couldn't ignore the desperate plea. Glancing at the clock, 11:14 p.m., Nora moved swiftly, grabbing her coat, keys, and her weapon, heart pounding in rhythm with every hurried step. Outside, a gentle autumn breeze carried a chill, rustling through leaves that crunched softly beneath her feet as she hurried toward her old Chevy, parked beneath a dim street lamp. Inside the car, she hesitated briefly, feeling an instinctive dread knotting her stomach. She reached into the glove compartment, retrieving one of her tapes labeled "Stay Calm, October '88, and slid it into the cassette player. The soft guitar strumming filled the tense silence, a comforting anchor. The drive toward the industrial park felt surreal, each streetlight passing by like a heartbeat, pulsing tension deeper into her chest. The old factories loomed silently. Ahead, abandoned sentinels forgotten by time, shadows dancing eerily against cracked windows. Warehouse 3 appeared dark and deserted as Nora slowed her car to a careful stop, cutting the engine and plunging the area into deep, unsettling silence. Taking a deep breath, she gathered her courage, exiting the vehicle cautiously. The cool air stung her lungs, the silence punctuated only by distant rustles of unseen creatures scurrying in the darkness. Her eyes scanned the emptiness, gripping her weapon tightly, the reassuring weight providing some comfort as she advanced slowly toward the warehouse. Every step felt heavier than the last, her instincts screaming warnings. She forced herself to silence. Someone needed her help. She repeated it internally, forcing her feet forward. Suddenly, a faint movement ahead froze her in place, adrenaline surging through her veins. A flashlight flickered in the distance, moving closer. The beam of light swung gently, illuminating patches of cracked pavement and wild grass pushing through neglected concrete. Her breath caught in her throat, heart hammering painfully in her chest. "Hello?" Nora called out, voice steadier than she felt. "Who's there?" The flashlight paused momentarily, then continued its approach without reply. Nora's grip tightened around her gun, her other hand instinctively reaching for the cassette player in her coat pocket, a subconscious comfort, a silent prayer for calm amidst uncertainty. The shadowy figure drew closer, silhouette vague behind the harsh beam of the flashlight. Nora squinted, attempting to discern a face, identity, anything familiar. Her senses heightened, each second stretching painfully as anticipation twisted her nerves. She stepped back instinctively, feeling trapped between curiosity and caution. "Identify yourself," she commanded firmly. The figure paused again, closer now, the flashlight beam abruptly blinding her eyes. Nora shielded her face instinctively, heart racing with tension so acute it felt physically painful. The figure took another step forward, slowly lowering the flashlight. Nora's pulse surged erratically, eyes straining against the residual glare to see clearly. But before the face revealed itself from the shadows, the sudden, sharp crack of breaking glass echoed loudly from somewhere nearby, startling Nora into a brief distraction. In that fraction of a moment, before her mind registered what had happened, A heavy blow struck her sharply from behind, sending sharp pain exploding through her skull. Darkness engulfed her consciousness swiftly, her last coherent thought a desperate, unanswered question. Who? The flashlight fell from her unseen attackers, hand bouncing once and rolling slowly away across cracked concrete. Silence reclaimed the night, broken only by the quiet whirring of her cassette player. Faint melodies still humming from her coat pocket as her limp body was dragged silently into the shadows, high above. Indifferent stars blinked coldly, bearing silent witness as the echoes of Nora Cassidy's disappearance settled over the empty industrial park, slowly swallowed by the endless night. Nearly 3 decades had passed, but Elliot Harlow still found himself retracing steps he'd taken hundreds of times before. He stood quietly at the edge of an abandoned parking lot near Boise's old industrial district, the cool air tugging at his gray-streaked hair, eyes gazing out across cracked pavement and rusted warehouses now blanketed in ivy and decay. The past haunted him, anchored by one face in particular, Agent Nora Cassidy. Her disappearance had defined Elliot's entire life, a shadow looming over every case, every personal decision, every restless night. As he moved slowly toward the empty lot, memories rushed back vividly, a painful replay of a night that had permanently altered his future. Back in 1988, Elliot had been a young agent, filled with idealism and a quiet, unspoken admiration for Nora. When news of her disappearance came, he'd rushed to this very place. The silence had been deafening. Police lights painting the buildings in streaks of red and blue, officers searching frantically, barking orders and whispers of disbelief cutting through the air. He'd spent hours combing every inch of the warehouses, only to emerge empty-handed. Nora vanished without a trace, and Elliot had felt the failure deeply, a wound never fully healed. Years passed, and the unresolved case became an obsession. Elliot developed a strange ritual, visiting places tied to unsolved mysteries, hoping the walls or trees might whisper answers the files couldn't provide. His colleagues often joked about it, but deep down they understood Elliot's quiet pilgrimage was a desperate search for closure. Today, standing at this lot once more, he felt that familiar pang. His phone rang sharply, breaking the heavy silence. "Harlow here," he answered. "Elliot, it's Sophie." "Something's come up urgent." Elliot's heart skipped a beat. Sophie Reed was the FBI's top forensic analyst. For her voice to carry urgency meant something significant had happened. "Where are you?" "The old salvage yard near Fairview Avenue." "You should come immediately." The old salvage yard was a graveyard for abandoned vehicles, a rusted relic forgotten by most people in Boise. Elliot's stomach churned uncomfortably as he drove towards the location, sensing an unexpected turn was awaiting him. Upon arrival, the yard was buzzing with activity. A crane hovered, its metal claw dangling above a half-buried car recently unearthed from decades of neglect. Sophie stood near the vehicle, her youthful face tense with anticipation, eyes narrowed in focused determination. "Elliot," she greeted softly, motioning towards the car. "You need to see this." He followed her closely, boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. When his eyes fell upon the battered, mud-caked Chevy, time seemed to freeze. The faded beige paint was barely recognizable, but Elliot knew this vehicle immediately. Nora Cassidy's old Chevy vanished 28 years before. Elliot approached slowly, his breathing uneven, hand trembling as it brushed the rusted surface. Images of Nora flashed before him again, her calm eyes, quiet strength, the way she'd meticulously labeled her cassette tapes. Emotions surged, relief mingling painfully with dread. "How long?" Elliot asked quietly, voice strained. "Probably buried for decades," Sophie answered gently. "Whoever hid it did an effective job." A team of forensic specialists moved carefully, photographing and documenting every angle. Elliot watched anxiously as technicians carefully pried open the driver's door, hinges creaking sharply. Inside, the interior had decayed badly, upholstery shredded, mold and earth reclaiming their space. It smelled stale, like forgotten memories left too long unattended. One investigator leaned into the vehicle, pausing abruptly. "Agent Reed," he called, voice shaking slightly. "There's something here." Elliot's pulse quickened as Sophie reached in carefully, withdrawing a small object wrapped tightly in clear evidence plastic. Her eyes widened with confusion, disbelief clouding her normally composed features. "What is it?" Elliot demanded urgently. She lifted the plastic-wrapped object higher, allowing Elliot a clear view. A cassette tape, perfectly preserved, bearing a neatly handwritten label, "Summer Mix 94. "That's impossible," Elliot whispered, disbelief flooding him. "Nora disappeared in '88. She couldn't have recorded this 6 years later." Silence fell among the investigators, a heavy realization gripping everyone present. Back at FBI headquarters, the tension was palpable. Technicians carefully cleaned and prepared the tape, ensuring playback was possible. Elliot stood rigidly in the viewing room, heart racing, anticipation twisting painfully. Sophie placed the tape into a vintage player, hands steady despite visible apprehension. The room fell silent as static hiss filled the air, followed suddenly by melodic chords, a song familiar to the 90s era, drifting hauntingly from speakers. Then abruptly, the music distorted, replaced by fragments of a woman's voice, desperate, frightened. Elliot's heart stopped Nora's voice. "They're watching me." Her breathing ragged, voice breaking with fear. "I don't know how much longer I can stay hidden. Please, somebody, please find me." The tape crackled, returning momentarily to music before cutting back to her fragmented whispers. "I saw what they did. So many kids. I'm sorry I trusted." Static drowned her out briefly. "Can't believe he betrayed us. He was one of ours. Please help me." Elliot's stomach twisted sharply, his eyes filled with horror and confusion. Nora's words implied a devastating betrayal. Questions flooded his mind. Who had turned on her? Where had she been? How had she survived unseen for years? The recording continued sporadically, music interwoven with Nora's broken pleas, each fragment more disturbing than the last. "They're everywhere. Too powerful. Nobody will believe." Nora sobbed quietly, voice weakening. "If anyone finds this, tell them about Timberline, the school. Rebecca Simmons. She knew everything. Timberline holds the key." Her voice faded into static, then abruptly silence. Sophie stopped the tape, breathing unevenly. Everyone in the room stood frozen, deeply shaken. Elliot felt dizzy, emotions overwhelming him. After nearly 30 years, Nora Cassidy had spoken from beyond her disappearance, revealing a chilling message. "Rebecca Simmons," Elliot muttered softly. "Do we have anything on her?" Sophie immediately began typing rapidly into the FBI database. After a tense silence, she shook her head slowly. "Nothing immediate. I'll run deeper checks." Elliot nodded, feeling the weight of years pressing down on him heavily. Timberline School was a ghost from the past, abandoned decades before. It had always seemed insignificant, but now Nora's desperate plea indicated a dark secret lurking within. He knew exactly what had to be done. Timberline School would become their new focal point, holding the clues that Nora had risked everything to reveal. Rebecca Simmons was the critical piece that would either unravel this horrifying puzzle or bury it even deeper. Elliot sank into his chair, feeling suddenly old and deeply weary. His eyes stared blankly at the cassette player, Nora's voice still echoing hauntingly through his mind. "I'm sorry I trusted." Those words chilled him to the bone. Betrayal from within. Had someone in the FBI itself been involved? How deep had Nora's discoveries run? His mind raced with horrifying possibilities, but one thought consumed him. He owed Nora closure. After years trapped in uncertainty, the truth was finally within reach, and Elliot vowed he wouldn't stop until he found her. Or at least, the answers she deserved. As he replayed Nora's last message silently, his fists clenched in determination. Timberline School awaited him, holding dark secrets within its abandoned halls. Secrets that would either destroy him or finally free him from a past that had haunted his life. Elliot rose decisively from his seat, ready to uncover the truth. Haunted by Nora's desperate voice echoing through his thoughts, guiding him toward a confrontation with buried secrets at Timberline and the mysterious Rebecca Simmons, whose name now became his sole focus. The past, buried for decades, was finally awakening. The chill of early morning fog wrapped tightly around Timberline School, turning the old, forgotten building into a ghostly figure emerging from a dream. The empty windows stared blindly, cracked panes resembling eyes long since hollowed out by neglect. Agent Sophie Reed stood quietly in the school's parking lot, her eyes narrowed thoughtfully as she scanned the looming structure. Sophie was known throughout the FBI for her obsessive attention to detail. Her workspace was a meticulously organized chaos of colorful index cards, each holding tiny fragments of clues she'd carefully pieced together. Sophie had spent years analyzing cold cases, never content until she could connect even the smallest threads. Though she projected relentless professionalism, beneath her composed facade lay deep sensitivity, a past shadowed by a family tragedy she'd never fully disclosed. That hidden pain drove her unwavering determination to bring closure to victims' families. She checked her watch, feeling a hint of impatience. As if summoned by her thoughts, a dark sedan rolled to a stop nearby, gravel crunching sharply beneath tires. Out stepped Mark Sheffield, a private detective well known for his eccentricity and sharp tongue. Mark was in his mid-50s, tall and lean, with wiry silver hair that stuck out at odd angles beneath a battered fedora. His sense of humor was notoriously sarcastic, and his methods were often unconventional. He frequently solved puzzles hidden in obscure novels or played chess against himself to untangle complex cases. Yet beneath his gruff exterior lay a fierce loyalty and surprising empathy, traits few people saw clearly through his rough edges. "Sorry I'm late," Mark drawled dryly, joining Sophie by the car. "Had to finish arguing with myself." "Lost the debate." "Too," Sophie smiled faintly. Mark's quirky banter often eased her anxiety. They moved cautiously toward the school's entrance, stepping carefully around broken glass and weeds bursting defiantly through the pavement. The door groaned heavily as Sophie pushed it open, releasing the scent of dampness, mold, and something uncomfortably metallic. Their flashlight beams cut sharply through the shadows, illuminating lockers covered in graffiti and walls peeling with age. The building breathed quietly around them, every creak and groan amplified by their senses. Timberline had been abandoned for decades, yet something lingered palpably within memories, secrets, echoes of past lives left unresolved. As they moved deeper, Sophie's flashlight swept slowly over the floor, catching something glossy half hidden beneath dust. Kneeling carefully, she uncovered several photographs, their edges yellowed and curling slightly with age. Her breath hitched, recognizing instantly that these faces belonged to teenagers long disappeared from Boise. Each smiling face sent a scent ripple of sadness through her. Mark knelt beside her, expression somber. "Someone tried to hide these." Sophie's voice was gentle, tinged with sorrow. They were just kids, lost and forgotten here. Together, they followed a trail of scattered photos toward a large, abandoned music room. Inside stood an ancient upright piano, keys yellowed, warped, and out of tune. Dust lay thickly upon its surface. Mark stepped forward, gently pressing a few keys that rang hollowly through the silent halls. A curious glint caught Sophie's attention, barely visible between two cracked keys. Her nimble fingers pried them apart carefully, revealing dozens of additional photographs tucked deliberately inside. As Sophie carefully laid them out, the horror deepened. The smiling faces were replaced by terrified expressions, candid shots captured at moments of fear and confusion. Mark cursed quietly. This wasn't just random disappearances. Someone documented this deliberately. Before they could absorb the full weight of the discovery, footsteps shuffled loudly behind them. Mark spun quickly, flashlight raised defensively, standing awkwardly. At the doorway was an elderly man, hunched slightly with age, eyes wide with suspicion. "What are you doing here?" he demanded hoarsely. Mark held up a calming hand. "We're investigating. FBI. Who are you?" The man hesitated, eyes flickering anxiously between Sophie and Mark. "Name's Harold Jenkins. I live across the road. Been watching people wander into this place for years, especially young folks. Never seen them come back out." Sophie felt dread settling heavily in her chest. "What exactly have you seen?" Harold sighed, eyes distant. "Back in the 80s and 90s, lots of kids disappeared around here. I saw strange lights, heard screams at night. No one ever listened to me. Figured I was just some crazy old man. But I know what I saw. Who did this?" Mark pressed urgently. "Someone powerful," Harold whispered nervously, glancing fearfully around the room as if speaking could summon danger. "They watched me, threatened me. Told me if I ever spoke." His voice trembled into silence. Mark exchanged a meaningful glance with Sophie, understanding they had uncovered something deeply sinister. As Harold hurried away, Sophie and Mark resumed searching the music room, the atmosphere now thick with tension. Suddenly, Mark's flashlight caught movement near the door. A tall figure emerged silently, a grotesque mask obscuring its face constructed entirely from yellowed newspaper clippings. Headlines of missing teens covered its surface, creating a nightmarish visage. Sophie's heart thundered violently. "Mark!" The masked figure lunged toward them with startling speed, knocking Sophie to the ground as Mark grappled desperately with their attacker. They struggled fiercely, the intruder's breathing ragged and frenzied behind the mask. Sophie's flashlight rolled away, throwing chaotic shadows across the walls. With a surge of adrenaline, Mark managed to grasp something around the attacker's neck, pulling sharply. A chain snapped loudly, and a delicate object clattered to the floor. The figure hesitated momentarily, breathing heavily, then fled abruptly into darkness, footsteps echoing faintly before fading entirely. Mark knelt quickly beside Sophie, helping her stand. "Are you okay?" Shaken but determined, Sophie nodded silently. Mark bent carefully, retrieving the fallen object. He held it up, the delicate gold chain sparkling faintly in his palm. Sophie's eyes widened with shock. Her trembling fingers reached out, touching the familiar necklace. "This belonged to Nora," she whispered, her voice tight with emotion. "She wore it every day." Mark's expression hardened, realization flooding him with dread. Whoever attacked them had been intimately connected to Nora's disappearance. But how? The school walls closed in tightly around them, suddenly more threatening than ever before. They were on the right track, dangerously close to uncovering secrets someone had desperately hidden for decades. But now it was clear, this was no ordinary investigation. They were being hunted by someone determined to keep the past buried, even if it meant adding Sophie and Mark to the list of Timberline's lost souls. Sophie's haunted expression, her voice barely audible as she stared at Nora's necklace. I recognize this. I've seen it before, not just on Nora. Mark stared at her, confusion mixing with dread. What do you mean? Her voice broke softly, heavy with fearful revelation. This necklace belonged to Rebecca Simmons. Darkness reclaimed the abandoned halls, enveloping them fully. Timberline School, filled with whispers from the past, held more sinister secrets than they had ever imagined, and their search for truth had just placed them in unimaginable danger. The quiet hum of machinery and whispered conversations filled the FBI's Boise field office as Elliot Harlow sat at his cluttered desk, fingers pressed tightly against his temples. The events at Timberline School still weighed heavily upon him, a haunting melody of unanswered questions and painful revelations. His eyes lingered on the old necklace found by Mark, a necklace once belonging to Nora Cassidy and now revealed to have a connection with Rebecca Simmons. The name echoed through his mind, drawing invisible threads of suspicion and uncertainty. Sophie Reed approached silently, her presence gentle yet determined. She carefully laid a stack of faded files on his desk, her eyes filled with quiet resolve. "These are the records you requested," she said softly. "Everything we have on Rebecca Simmons and Timberline School." Elliot looked up, gratitude mingled with an underlying sadness visible in his expression. "Thanks, Sophie. Have you found anything new about Rebecca?" Sophie shook her head slowly. "Not directly, but there's something else you should see." She handed Elliot another folder, thicker and worn with age, bearing the label Voice of Justice. "What's this?" Elliot asked, intrigue pulling him forward in his seat. "Something Mark uncovered," Sophie replied, glancing toward Mark Sheffield, as he joined them, wearing his characteristic fedora tilted slightly backward. "An old pirate radio station, operated in secret here in Boise. It started broadcasting around 1990 and abruptly ended around 94. Mark nodded gravely. "The station aired anonymous accusations against local authorities and powerful figures, exposing corruption and disappearances no one else dared mention publicly." Elliot opened the folder, his heart thumping anxiously. Inside were handwritten logs of broadcasts, newspaper clippings, and grainy photos of radio equipment, concealed in an abandoned warehouse downtown. His pulse quickened when his eyes fell upon a photo clearly Nora Cassidy, thinner, weary-looking, but unmistakably her, operating equipment and speaking fervently into a microphone. Elliot's breathing hitched. For nearly 3 decades, he'd tortured himself, believing Nora had vanished without any trace or hope of finding her. And now here was evidence she'd lived, struggled, fought hidden in plain sight, reaching out in desperation through secret. RADIO waves. She was alive, he whispered, grief and anger battling within him. She was alive all this time, and we didn't see. Mark placed a reassuring hand firmly on Elliot's shoulder. We couldn't have known. Nora hid well out of necessity. Elliot's voice shook, his expression filled with guilt. We should have looked harder. She was begging for help. Listen, he pointed to transcripts. They're everywhere. Too powerful. Nobody believes me. She must have felt so alone. Sophie's expression softened empathetically. But Nora didn't give up. She risked everything to expose this corruption. She chose to fight. Elliot nodded slowly, fighting back. The sharp sting of tears. Nora had been more courageous than he'd ever imagined. The admiration he always felt surged anew, colored now by sorrow and regret that he'd failed to find her sooner. Hours slipped by unnoticed as the trio combed meticulously through the station's old records. The broadcasts repeatedly accused powerful individuals, including politicians, wealthy businessmen, and police officials, of abducting vulnerable teens, silencing witnesses, and manipulating investigations. Names familiar to Elliot and Mark surfaced with disturbing frequency, triggering disbelief and fury. Mayor Timothy Ellis, Mark muttered grimly, reading a faded transcript. Sheriff Carl Benning, Commissioner David Stone. These people practically ran Boise back then. Sophie's eyes flashed angrily. No wonder Nora couldn't get anyone to believe her. They controlled everything. Elliot's fists clenched involuntarily, anger simmering dangerously beneath his typically calm surface. The betrayal Nora mentioned now had a chilling face. The people sworn to protect Boise had instead destroyed countless lives, including hers. As evening fell, the FBI office became quieter, shadows lengthening across desks cluttered with evidence. Elliot rubbed tired eyes, feeling the weight of decades pressing harder than ever. Nora's words haunted him endlessly. "I'm sorry I trusted." "Elliot," Mark interrupted his thoughts gently, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "We're close now. Nora's fight wasn't in vain. We're going to finish it." Elliot nodded resolutely, determination renewed by Mark's quiet confidence. Their concentration was abruptly shattered by the shrill ring of Mark's cell phone. He glanced at Elliot and Sophie before answering cautiously, "Sheffield here." The voice on the other end was shaky, nervous, barely audible. Mark strained to listen, his face growing pale and tense. "Slow down. Who is this?" There was a pause. "I can't tell you that. Just listen carefully," whispered the caller urgently. "There's someone alive who knows everything, someone who's seen Nora Cassidy, knows exactly what happened." Mark's pulse quickened. "Who? Where?" The caller hesitated, voice trembling with fear. "An old witness hiding in a cabin near the Boise River. She was Nora's contact, knew about the radio, everything. Find her quickly, they know she's alive too." The line clicked dead, leaving Mark holding the silent phone tightly. He stared at Sophie and Elliot, eyes wide with urgency and hope. "What happened?" Elliot demanded, feeling anticipation rush through him. Mark exhaled slowly, voice shaking slightly with adrenaline. "There's a witness near Boise River. Someone still alive who can finally tell us exactly what happened to Nora." Elliot felt his heart hammer violently in his chest, hope mingling sharply with apprehension. The voice of justice Nora Cassidy had created so bravely from the shadows was now within reach of finally being heard. The truth she'd fought so desperately to reveal had waited decades, hidden in whispers and static. But now, finally, it was breaking free. The three investigators standing in silence, determination etched clearly upon their faces, knowing their next step was both critical and dangerous. The path forward led directly to the secluded banks of Boise River and the mysterious witness whose memories could unravel decades of secrets and betrayals, finally bringing Nora Cassidy's fight for justice to light or plunging them all deeper into darkness. The old cabin near Boise River appeared half hidden by dense trees, a forgotten relic quietly crumbling away in isolation. It was difficult to imagine anyone living here, cut off entirely from the outside world. Elliot, Mark, and Sophie stepped carefully along the narrow path leading to the small porch, each carrying heavy thoughts about what awaited inside. Elliot knocked softly, the sound echoing lightly through the silence. The door opened slowly, revealing an elderly woman whose wary eyes scanned each of them carefully. Her face, lined deeply by time and worry, softened gradually when she recognized the sincerity in Elliot's gaze. "You must be Helen Carter," Elliot began gently. "I'm Elliot Harlow, FBI. This is Mark Sheffield and Sophie Reed. We need your help." Helen studied them silently, emotions playing across her weary face. Eventually, she nodded slowly, stepping aside. "Come inside quickly. It's safer indoors." The cabin interior smelled faintly of wood smoke and old paper. Stacks of newspapers, files, and vintage records crowded every corner. Helen's eyes nervously darted toward the windows, as if constantly expecting danger, settling into worn chairs around a table littered with handwritten notes. Helen exhaled deeply, eyes fixed on Elliot. "You're here about Nora Cassidy, aren't you?" Elliot nodded solemnly. "We've uncovered evidence she was alive, operating a pirate radio called the Voice of Justice." "Did you know her?" Helen's eyes filled instantly with tears, pain surfacing clearly from memories she'd fought hard to bury. "Nora and I became friends in secret after she vanished in '88. I was a journalist back then, chasing stories nobody wanted told. We trusted each other. She was fearless, brilliant, haunted." Helen paused, voice trembling. "When she escaped from captivity, she contacted me. We started the Voice of Justice, using my equipment to broadcast accusations against powerful men. It was risky, dangerous, but she believed deeply in exposing the truth." Elliot's heart twisted sharply. He imagined Nora, desperate yet resilient, fighting unseen battles. What happened in 1994? Helen's voice broke slightly, emotions raw. "One night, Nora discovered the location where the abducted teens were. Held, hidden in an old military bunker near Boise. She insisted on rescuing them. We knew it was dangerous, but Nora wouldn't be stopped." Tears streamed silently down Helen's cheeks. "We reached the bunker, quietly releasing several terrified teens, but someone had betrayed us. Suddenly, there were flashlights, gunshots, chaos everywhere. Nora screamed at me to run, begged me to protect the kids we'd freed." Helen closed her eyes tightly, reliving that terrible night. "I looked back once, just once, and saw them recapturing Nora, dragging her away. I barely escaped alive." The three investigators sat silently, the gravity of Helen's account overwhelming them. Sophie spoke softly, voice thick with emotion. "You couldn't have saved her, Helen. She knew what she was risking." Helen's haunted eyes met Sophie's gently. "I've carried that guilt every day since. But I've also been waiting, hiding evidence, hoping someday someone brave enough would find me. Come with me." She led them slowly toward a corner stacked high with vinyl records. Carefully lifting several aside, Helen revealed a hidden compartment filled with dusty cassettes, meticulously labeled. Elliot picked one up carefully, reading the name with disbelief. "Thomas Greer, corruption evidence." Helen nodded gravely. Nora trusted Greer deeply. It broke her heart to realize he'd orchestrated everything. He controlled Boise, protected the criminals, manipulated investigations, even orchestrated her initial disappearance in '88. Elliot felt sickened betrayal, striking deep within his core. The man he'd admired, respected, who had mentored and guided him, had destroyed Nora's life. It was a bitter, painful revelation, but now everything made sense. The failed investigations, ignored evidence, the ease with which people vanished without consequences. Mark shook his head slowly, eyes dark with anger. "We need to get these tapes out immediately." Helen clutched Elliot's arm urgently. "Please hurry. They're still watching. Greer's network still lives." They carefully placed the cassettes into an evidence case, urgency pulsing in every hurried movement. Elliot turned softly toward Helen, his voice steady yet gentle. "We'll protect you. You don't have to run anymore." Helen's eyes were filled with gratitude, yet doubt lingered. "Promise me you'll finish Nora's fight." "She sacrificed everything." Elliot's gaze hardened resolutely. "I promise." Moments later, as dusk fell softly around them, Elliot, Mark, and Sophie departed quietly, their car heavy with damning evidence. Against Greer and his associates. Silence enveloped the vehicle, each occupant absorbed deeply in their own thoughts. As they traveled the winding, isolated road beside Boise River, headlights illuminated the darkening path, the quiet rhythm broken only by their breathing. Suddenly, blinding high beams flashed from behind, flooding their car in harsh white light. Elliot glanced sharply into the rearview mirror. "We have company," he warned grimly. Before Sophie could react, the pursuing vehicle accelerated aggressively, slamming violently into their rear bumper. The force threw everyone forward sharply. "Hold on," Elliot shouted, gripping the wheel tightly, fighting desperately to maintain control as tires skidded wildly. Another violent crash echoed sharply, metal screaming against metal. Mark braced himself, voice filled with panic and anger. "They're trying to run us off." Elliot pressed the accelerator desperately, heart pounding violently. The attacking vehicle surged forward relentlessly, striking once more with punishing force. The world spun abruptly as Elliot's vehicle lost traction, careening sharply off the narrow road, crashing through dense bushes and branches toward the steep banks of Boise River. Glass shattered loudly, chaos exploding around them as the car tumbled violently down the embankment, finally coming to rest dangerously close to icy waters below. In the aftermath, silence settled heavily. Sophie groaned softly, lifting her head weakly, bleeding from a cut on her forehead. Mark stirred slowly beside her, coughing painfully but conscious. Elliot lay motionless against the wheel, blood trickling from a head wound, eyes closed and unresponsive. Sophie's voice shook with fear and desperation. "Elliot, can you hear me?" No response came. In the distance, the attacking vehicle paused briefly at the road's edge before speeding away into darkness, its taillights vanishing quickly. Sophie's heart clenched painfully as she realized their attackers believed their raise. Work complete. "Elliot, please wake up," Sophie pleaded softly, her voice breaking with emotion. Mark carefully checked Elliot's pulse, exhaling shakily with relief. "He's alive, but barely. We need help now." Fear settled deeply into their hearts, alongside grim determination. The enemy had struck violently, ruthlessly seeking to silence them. Nora Cassidy's truth remained threatened by forces powerful enough to kill. But the evidence they'd found could still change everything. Lying unconscious, Elliot's mind drifted somewhere between life and death, haunted by images of Nora, her quiet strength, her desperate struggle for justice. His promise echoed clearly through his fading consciousness, fueling a quiet, fierce will to survive, no matter the cost. A low humming echoed in Elliot's ears as consciousness slowly returned. Sharp pain stabbed through his head, reminding him of the crash. Sophie and Mark hovered anxiously above, eyes wide with worry. "Elliot, can you hear me?" Sophie's voice cracked, desperate and raw. Slowly, painfully, Elliot managed a faint nod, eyes fluttering open. The blurred outlines of twisted metal around them sharpened, bringing back vivid memories of the violent ambush. Elliot grimaced as he sat upright, head throbbing fiercely. "Did we lose the tapes?" Elliot rasped, his voice thick with worry. "No, they're safe," Mark reassured him, holding up the battered evidence case. "But whoever attacked us clearly wants them destroyed." Determination surged through Elliot, overpowering his pain. "We have to move now. They think we're out of the picture. This is our chance." Supported by Mark and Sophie, Elliot rose shakily to his feet. His resolve burned brightly now. They would end this once and for all. Night had fallen completely, casting shadows that twisted menacingly around the abandoned industrial park near Boise. The entrance to the hidden bunker described by Helen was obscured by decades of neglect, its iron door barely visible beneath layers of rust and ivy. Elliot's flashlight illuminated the corroded lock as Mark forced it open, hinges shrieking protest into the night air. Inside, darkness swallowed them immediately. A chilling silence pressed oppressively, disturbed only by their cautious footsteps. Echoing down narrow corridors, flashlight beams danced nervously across damp concrete walls, revealing faded graffiti, rusted pipes, and water pooling silently on the cold floor. The air was heavy, musty with abandonment, and something darker, a sense of lingering despair. As they moved deeper, Sophie gasped softly, stopping abruptly. Her flashlight illuminated objects scattered carelessly across the floor: school backpacks, worn sneakers, wallets, personal belongings discarded cruelly, remnants of vanished lives. Elliot knelt, carefully picking up a faded photograph of smiling teens. Grief struck him sharply. These kids, they were here. Suddenly, a faint noise ahead caught Mark's attention. He held up his hand sharply, signaling caution. The trio moved forward slowly, hearts racing anxiously. Ahead, faint cries echoed, softly, muffled, and weak. They quickened their pace, driven by urgency, until their flashlights illuminated a small, heavily locked door. Mark quickly broke the lock, metal grinding harshly as the door swung open, revealing a sight that stole Elliot's breath completely. A woman, thin and pale, chained loosely to a rusted bed frame. Elliot froze, his heart slamming painfully into his chest. Her hair had grown long and gray, face worn deeply by decades of isolation. But those eyes, bright, defiant, deeply familiar, stared back at him. Nora? Elliot whispered, disbelief choking his voice. Recognition flickered faintly. In her tired gaze, hope kindling weakly. Elliot, is it really you? He rushed forward, falling to his knees beside her, hands trembling violently as he gently released her chains. Tears blurred his vision, emotion choking him. I'm so sorry, Nora. I should have found you sooner. Nora's weakened hand touched his face gently, forgiveness flooding her expression. You found me now. That's all that matters. Sophie watched silently, tears streaming down her face. Mark's jaw clenched tightly, emotion fighting through his usual stoicism. The moment was profound, heartbreaking, yet hopeful. 3 decades of agony washed away by the power of reunion. As they helped Nora slowly to her feet, her weakened voice trembled with urgency. It was Thomas Greer. He did this. He's been behind everything. Elliot felt nausea twist sharply in his stomach. Thomas, he was my mentor, Nora. How? Nora's eyes hardened bitterly. He betrayed us all. The disappearances, cover-ups. He controlled Boise through fear. The night I vanished in '88, Thomas himself was there, orchestrating everything. Flashbacks overwhelmed Elliot suddenly. Every moment spent trusting, respecting, even loving Thomas Greer, now tainted by the ugly truth. Anger surged through him fiercely. The man he'd admired deeply had been the villain all along. We have evidence, Sophie said firmly. We can end this. At Boise PD, tension peaks as Elliot escorts a frail but resolute Nora into the interrogation room where former FBI chief Thomas Greer sits unsuspectingly. Confronted with files proving decades of abductions and cover-ups, Greer's facade crumbles. Rage replacing his feigned concern just as officers cuff him, justice long overdue. Weeks later, sunlight warms Elliot's office as Nora, slowly recovering, reflects on the rescued teens and the end of Greer's reign. Guilt and gratitude mix as the two acknowledge each other's courage and vow to rebuild their lives by helping others. With Boise finally at peace and the voice of justice triumphant, they share a quiet moment of hope ready to turn hard-won closure into a new beginning.